All right, it's time to do predictions for Ultimate Fight Night 119, or aka Ultimate Fight Night Derek Brunson versus Lito Machida, aka I think Sao Paulo. Look this up real quick. Sao Paulo, Brazil. So UFC Ultimate Fight Night Sao Paulo. Interesting card. The two big fights on the card, the Machida fight against Brunson and the Maia fight versus Covington, are bizarrely similar. Really bizarrely similar, but we'll get to that. Not that how I think they're going to play out, but the narrative for both of them is very similar. So we open up with Marcelo Golm versus Christian Godzilla Columbo. I don't actually have a lot of faith in Christian Columbo, and I don't have any faith in Marcelo Golm, who is a 4-0 prospect whose combined opponent's record is 2-10. This brings me to the point where, as much as he's probably the more promising fighter, I can't pick him. I can't bring myself to do that. I have no idea if anything in his game is good. Like, I understand that he's got good finishing, he's got good ground and pound, takedowns are theoretically not bad, but he's fought no one that I respect as being any good. And as much as there's not a lot I like about Christian Columbo's game, I think he's tremendously unathletic, but I think you can get away with that to a degree at heavyweight. And he's got a somewhat technical kickboxing game, and that's about it. I am going to pick him to win this fight by decision, but this is a pick by elimination. That I cannot pick a guy whose combined opponent records are 2-10 coming into the UFC. I just can't. Then we have Deiveson Figueiredo versus Jared Brooks. I'm very interested in this fight. Tough call to make because I don't know a ton about Figueiredo, pardon me. He's a guy who was kind of under my radar until getting into the UFC and fighting Marco Beltran. And Jared Brooks, know him pretty well. Kind of a surprising Japanese background for an American fighter. I'm going to go with Jared Brooks. I think he has a style that suits flyweight very well, in the sense that it's a takedown scramble kind of style, wrestler jiu-jitsu in a nutshell. Very, predominantly works. You can see this with guys like Henry Cejudo, Joe Benavidez, Demetrius Johnson to a degree. He's come kind of from that mold, whereas Figueiredo is more. He's kind of relying on actually just being able to overpower you and over-dynamicize you, and I don't really know if that's the way to go at flyweight, where everyone's pretty damn dynamic. And we saw Beltran have some success against him, and I think we've seen that Marco Beltran as a flyweight is a terrible, terrible idea. So that's kind of in the back of my mind. So Jared Brooks by decision, but that's a fight I'm looking forward to. Elizu Zaleski dos Santos versus Max Griffin. I like both of these guys, but Griffin is tremendously unrefined. He's at a point where he's kind of like a wild brawler despite a very traditional martial arts background. He's a fantastic athlete, so that will buy him wins while he's rounding out his game. But I think that's insufficient to deal with Dos Santos, who's a guy I really wasn't a fan of when he came into the UFC. I kind of said a lot of the same things I'm saying about Max Griffin about Dos Santos then, that I felt his game needed to be rounded out and polished. And it has been. He's actually become much better at countering, much better at just boxing in general. His takedown defense is actually pretty solid. His ability to take you down is also pretty solid. So I got him by decision. But he could get knocked out. I mean, Max Griffin's got a ton of power and just an ability to take your head off. Then we have this is a lightweight bout. Interesting. So Hacker Diaz is up at lightweight now. That's a bit weird. That might be a misprint. I don't know. So it's Jared Gordon versus Hacker Diaz. Jared Gordon is the guy I'm hoping wins the fight, because Hacker Diaz he's absolutely on the decline. Like, there's not really any remote question on the matter. His abilities in all areas, it's still technically very strong, but physically I think he's declining. It's a low enough weight class that's something that's important. He didn't really have ways to reliably win fights when he kind of was at his physical prime. But I look at what Jared Gordon likes to do, and it plays right into the wheelhouse of Hager and Diaz. It plays into a wheelhouse that should allow him to get takedowns and allow him to show the strongest part of his game, which is the grappling component. So I'm going to go with Hager and Diaz to win a decision. But I am cheering for Jared Gordon because if he wins, that could be a big thing for the future. Because that would, I think, crown him as a legitimate prospect to look out for. And to be honest, you can never have too many of those. Then we have Antonio Carlos Jr., the Shoeface, versus Jack Marshman. Antonio Carlos Jr. can absolutely get knocked out in this fight. We saw that with Dan Kelly. But his stand-up is pretty good for a BJJ guy. He has a really good blast elbow. Jack Marshman is takedownable. He is the better grappler of the two and should be able to pick up a submission or a decision. I'm going to say decision because I'm going to assume that in MMA, Antonio Carlos Jr. has not been... He's not been the super aggressive grappler type. He's been more of a control grappler type. And I think that comes into play here is he's not going to really want Marshman to stand back up because Marshman is a really good boxer. Very powerful. But, barely squeaked past Ryan James in a fight that I thought was tailor-made for him to showcase himself. And then he goes into this fight. And I just have no confidence in it, although he could totally knock out Carlos Jr. Vicente Luque versus Nico Price is a very interesting fight. That's the next one up, but I think this one definitely ends in a finish. Both these guys are very powerful strikers. Luke's got some submission ability. Nico Price has got a little bit of submission ability as well. I'm leaning towards Nico Price, even though I like the package that is Vicente Luque more. I think it's more conducive to long-term success. I think it's conducive to success over the course of a fight. Whereas Nico Price, I think, is a not very good counterpuncher who wants time and space. And when you're not a very good counterfighter and you want time and space, that's usually a pretty bad mix. I think we saw that to a degree in the Alex Morono fight before he finished Morono. But he does have insane power, it seems. He knocks people out with shots that don't seem like they should knock someone out. I think that's the simplest way to put it. And I see him at some point catching Vicente Luque, who I think is definitely catchable. I think he's, there are some defensive flaws to his game, and Price connects with something and knocks him out. And it's going to be the weirdest thing, ever. That's my thought. John Lineker versus Marlon Vera. This is the fight I'm the most confident calling. I've got Lineker by TKO. Or knockout. Marlon Vera, winner over Brad Pickett. Recent win over... who was it? It was Brian Kelleher. Submitted him and really made me question Kelleher's long-term viability, but then Kelleher had that fantastic fight with Damian Stasiak. So just getting a little off topic there, but I'm gonna pretty easily go with Lineker here with a first or second round knockout. He will walk through stuff, and Vera's frustratable, defensively porous. I think there's a ton of things that Lineker can make happen here and get a stoppage. This would be a loss to a fighter well below anything that Lineker's ever lost to before. It's I guess maybe Luis Gadno. Thiago Santos versus Jack Hermansson. Interest in this fight. Hermansson is a nightmare matchup for Santos, and Santos is a nightmare matchup for Hermansson, and that's kind of weird. It's incredibly weird when you get that, because the strengths of Hermansson, the jab, the takedown game, the top pressure, and ground and pound, is exactly what I think you need to break Thiago Santos. That being said, we saw in the Cesar Mutanche fight that you can absolutely break Jack Hermansson's game if you just take away the jab from him, and I think Thiago Santos can do that. So it's very weird in that regard. The difference, I think, is that Hermansson's problems, I think, you can learn from. I think he kind of gave up on the jab against Mutanch, and and shouldn't have. Whereas the problems in Thiago Santos' game, I think, are systematic and to a degree uncorrectable. He's very reliant on his athleticism, and he does break a little bit. And that's why I got to go with Hermansson. Hermansson beat TKO first or second round. That's my call. But this could go completely wrong for me. Jim Miller versus Francisco Trinaldo. I'm going to go with Jim Miller via a late submission. Trinaldo does give up opportunities to sub him with a reasonable regularity. And, well, I think he's going to be very, very strong in the first round, and will probably take the first round with his Muay Thai game and his difficulty people have in taking him down. I think Miller can survive that and take over late. And there's just nothing with Trinaldo that isn't replicated by guys that Jim Miller has beaten in the past. So Jim Miller submission. Moving on, Pedro Munoz versus Rob Font. I am going with Rob Font. I have a bizarre take on Pedro Munoz, I think, in a lot of ways. I think that he's a guy that it's very difficult to look good against because he likes to pressure, likes to throw a lot, likes to go for takedowns a lot, but his takedown percentages are so low, and like his way of winning this fight is to get Rob Font down, and Font's pretty hard to take down, or to catch Rob Font with a guillotine coming in. And I'm hoping that Font is smart enough to adjust his game to not include the wrestling that he usually does, and make this kind of just make it a range kickboxing game, which Munoz is not. He's very good at hanging around him, but he doesn't really win. If you want proof, he won the Stosniak fight, but that's an example of one that struggled a little bit. Russell Doan gave him problems there. Justin Scoggins, Jimmy Rivera, pardon me, all kind of have that same feel to them, and I think Font can replicate that. Colby Covington, Demian Maia. Now we get into this potential passing of the torch. Demian Maia and Lyoto Machida are kind of in the same spot in my book. They're fighters who are very much on the decline. They're very much waiting for that loss to someone who's up and coming. And Covington and Brunson both fit those criteria very well. I'm kind of talking about the two fights at the same time because I see them so very similar in that they can absolutely lose these fights, but they're style matchups that even in their advancing age really suit them. In the case of Maia, it's that Covington's going to try and take him down, and Covington's not going to disengage, and he absolutely can be tapped out because his way of submission defense in a nutshell is like, I'm going to be a bucking bronco and get through it. Like he's not likely to pull a Tyron Woodley or a Chris Weidman and just sprawl and brawl Maia. So it's weird. Like Covington, this is absolutely rankings wise a fight that Maia should lose. He should be almost tumbling down the rankings right now. But the stylistic matchup is just so good for him that he should be able to win this. And I keep trying to tell myself he's 39 years old, he's on the downside, but just everything Covington wants to do, and the fact that Covington has a real ego about it plays right into Maia's game. So I'm gonna go Demian Maia to submit Colby Covington at some point. And I'm kind of in the same boat with the Brunson Machida thing, in the fact that Brunson absolutely has the ability to pressure Machida and kind of break him in a manner similar, or in a blitzing manner similar to Yoel Romero. But when he does that, he leaves himself so very, very open to getting plastered. See the Robert Whittaker fight. And his other mode of fighting is to be very, very low output, outside, hanging around, like the Anderson Silva fight where he ended up losing. And that's also a fight that Maia can win. So, Maia's or Machida, Machida and Maia, they both should be losing to fighters ranked at Brunson and Covington's levels at this point. But it's like they picked the one guy that stylistically played really into their strengths. And so I'm going with Machida to find his chin and knock him out. I would not be surprised to say both of these picks fail. So do not put money on this, because you're dealing with two fighters that are aging and could fall off even more. And we've already seen the Machida fall off to a degree with the scary fights with Rockhold and Romero. We haven't quite seen that with Maia, because I don't think, like, Maia losing to Woodley is not a sign of age, just a sign of what a nightmare stylistic matchup that was always going to be. I think if you put a prime Woodley if you put a prime Maia in there with Woodley at almost any point in his career, it's outside of like the very early going, it's a pretty winnable fight for Woodley. So that's what I'm going with, and I'm gonna feel terrible with those two fights if they end up going the other way. But I'm very interested in this card for a free card. I mean, I think Hermansson and Santos is a fantastically interesting fight. I think Ronaldo Miller has potential to be a war. I think that Price versus Luque is going to be fun as all hell. I think Max Griffin versus Dos Santos is a fun fight. I think Figueiredo and Brooks is a fun fight. I'm dreading Christian Columbo versus Marcelo Golm, but like everything else, I'm honestly kind of looking forward to. So good matchmaking, but just at the same time, very weird matchmaking at the top of the card. So that's what I got. Hope you enjoy, and I hope you enjoy the fights.